And this is the beginning. Okay. So a little thought, we're in section C now. A little thought will make it apparent to you why the sun is the ruler of all three conditions of Leo. The exoteric condition having to do with the personality, the esoteric condition having to do with the soul, and the hierarchical condition having to do with the spirit. Three levels of identity, but somehow more microcosmic than Aries, which is macrocosmic. We have to establish identity. In Leo, we must establish the correct level of identity. So, what we think we are and what we are, there's quite a dynamic contrast between those things. More and more, there is an approximation between what we think we are and what we actually are. As evolution proceeds, we have a truer estimation of what we actually are, not a false estimation which requires self-effacement. If we really know what we are, that which we know need not be effaced, because it is the one being itself, which cannot be effaced. It is the permanent factor in life forever. So self-effacement always has to do with the lower ego, false identities. And there is a scorpionic kind of destruction of false identities as Scorpio stages the release of Leo. Undermining those false identities and saying, you're not what you think, you're not what you think. And then with pain, the egocentric individual gives up what he thinks he is, only to discover that he's really more. And that more and more is less and less. At least it's less and less obstructive to the view he achieves within his contents of consciousness. So it's a very blinded sight that the egocentric individual has, but that blindness is becoming increasingly tenuous when self-effacement occurs, wearing away the ego until it becomes the point. Well, Master Morya was quite dramatic when he basically called the ego, meaning the lower ego, a ball of fat. It's an unnecessary accumulation, it's obstructive, it's non-integrative, it's non-assimilative, it's simply obstructive, something we've accumulated as unnecessary over many, many years. Of course, it has been necessary to build a sense of selfhood, but after a while, a perversion happens and it begins to become an end in itself. I think, in a way, that's what happened to the members of the Black Lodge in a Leo sense. They began to loom overly large in their own field of vision until they began to deify the lower ego. I think some of the great statues of the past are built to celebrate their own identity. That's why Leo is considered a materialistic sign and a sign of the Black Lodge in some respect, because it has to do with untrue materialistic perception, which takes an unreality, namely the lower ego, for a constant reality and seeks to glorify that illusion at the expense of reality and at the expense of everything other than itself. It is it's a condition which really obstructs the divine plan and the expression of one's true harmonious contribution to the divine plan. It builds one up as something one is not, and dedicates all energies to the preservation of that illusion. So really, materialism is a question of perception, of veiled perception. You can't be a materialist if you can see beyond the lower planes and the aggregations which one makes using the perception of the lower planes. So, it is a correct surmise, says the Tibetan, that the purpose of this solar system is the unfoldment of consciousness. This is a second-ray solar system. It has a second-ray soul and personality. It is the second major solar system in the expression of our solar logos. And if the previous solar system was given to the development of personality, the personality elementals of the solar logos, then this system is given to his increasing sensitization, his expanding view of his cosmic environment, his polarization within cosmic higher mind, which would mean that he was a third-degree cosmic initiate, which he is not yet. So we have to identify how consciousness is different from matter activity. And once we have viewed, seen within our sights the nature of consciousness, we know what its unfoldment can mean. It's simply being aware of more, touching more, being sensitive to more, having a wider, more sensitive, more inclusive ability to receive impacts from all directions. So it's emergence into the light, out of a darkened room, into the light and into ever greater lights. So it is a correct surmise that the purpose of this solar system is the unfoldment of consciousness, and if, for the strictly human being, self-consciousness is the goal, then the sun must obviously rule, for it is the source of physical consciousness, exoteric and symbolic, of the personality. The sun, I suppose, as an outer factor. We're not speaking here of the heart of the sun. Okay. We're speaking of the actual, I think, physical sun. Physical sun, physical consciousness. And that exoteric aspect of man, which we call the personality. However, if we look at the deeper aspects of the sun, we're touching the subjective sun, the heart of the sun, the central spiritual sun, then the sun is not only symbolic of physical consciousness, but of soul awareness. That's the esoteric aspect. Esoteric Leo, ruled by the sun, veiling the planet Neptune, and of the spiritual life, or the divine life. The hierarchical sun, veiling the planet Uranus. So, he says, I am reiterating the necessity to recognize the stimulation of consciousness as the objective of all astrological influences. Somehow, in this astrology of consciousness, we are learning a completely different mode of interpretation than the normal exoteric astrology reveals. So, the sun is the great symbol of identity on the exoteric, esoteric, and hierarchical levels. It is the central star, and as I've said, I think that our solar logos must have a very close connection with the Lord of the constellation Leo, and hence the rulership. Does this mean that the constellation Leo is especially highly developed, that that is a very highly developed Lord, more so than others? I cannot say, but certainly I believe that our sun and the planet in our solar system, which is in a way is most like our sun, which is Jupiter, is very connected with the Lord of the constellation Leo. So I am reiterating the necessity to recognize that the stimulation of consciousness and or the stimulation of sensitivity, a key note of Leo, as the objective of all astrological influences is not to make better personal circumstances. If personal circumstances are worse and consciousness benefits, then the goal is served. If the integrity and comfort of personal circumstances is preserved, but consciousness is not sensitized, then the purpose is not served. So this is the objective of all astrological influences, because the outstanding theme of Leo, well, I guess if he says this, we really have to pay attention, is the activity of the self-conscious unit in relation to its environment, or the development of sensitive response to the impacts, to surrounding impacts by the one who stands as the sun stands at the center of its little universe. So this is worth rereading. If he says outstanding, we have to reread it. The outstanding theme of Leo is the activity of the self-conscious unit in relation to its environment, or the development of sensitive response to the surrounding impacts by the one who stands as the sun stands at the center of the universe. Now, why? To distinguish the central unit from all that stands around, and to glorify the central unit in relation to all that with which it might otherwise confuse itself or its identity. What is the self? What is the not self? The sensitive central unit can discriminate the self and the not self, and become ever more the self in expression. So the sensitivity reveals the environment for what it is and reveals the self for what it is. Let's put it that way. This growing sensitivity reveals the self for what it is and the not self for what it is. And thus the self can more completely express within the fields of the not self, and then God's will is done, the purpose is accomplished, the plan is enacted, and the glorified self can work through the field of the apparent not self in an unobstructed manner. So why the sensitivity? Sensitivity to find the self, really. A growing sensitivity in consciousness in order to find the self and be the self. Sensitivity. We have to have the reason for it, because otherwise we're liable to think of a kind of sensitivity which is like a water sign sensitivity, sensitive to impacts. But what is the purpose of this sensitivity? It's also sensitivity to what the self is. Sensitivity to the environment to define what the self is. Sensitivity to the self to define or to reveal that the environment is not that. So it's an essential discrimination between self and environment. Until later it is proved that the not self, Neptune scheme, that won't work. Let's try this. Yes, not self really is the self. Well, this is the science of being in a way. It's ontology. Now some, maybe the Buddhist philosophers, try to do away with the self altogether, but it all depends on how we define self. There is no true part at all. Anything that says the part is real is a false statement. The part is temporarily actual and is an externalization of the one infinite being, as DK has told us, but in time and space and for a certain illusory duration, we have to act as if parts are real, because that's the only way to promote the purpose of the great being who apparently subdivided itself for purposes that we cannot really fathom, but which have something to do with the infinite, I think, divine creativity. Finding the cursor. Play the game, find the cursor. Then we can move on. So the whole story and function of Leo and its influences can be summed up in the word sensitivity. Sensitivity. This is so different, isn't it, from ordinary astrology, which may simply emphasize the personality and the lower selfhood, but it's a question of consciousness, because Leo, as a fire sign, is the fire sign most identified with consciousness. So how will DK look at this sensitivity and its stages? First, sensitivity to conditioning impacts from the environment, to the impacts of the world of human evolution. The three worlds or planes through the medium of the three aspects of the response apparatus of the soul. So the inner consciousness becomes increasingly conscious of the not-self, the surroundings, and grows in awareness of circumstance, Remember that the advanced Leo type comes positive to circumstance under Uranus. So positivity to circumstance is something the Leo subject develops eventually, but at first just waking up to what's around. And when you look at the symbol of the sun, there's that point. It's like the point of inner consciousness, and it's surrounded by something. Does it know? Can it register all the impacts coming from its present ring past now? This is the first stage. Then there's another form of sensitivity. What is it? Sensitivity to the will, wishes, and desires of the personality. These are, what can we call these? Promptings from the fourfold elemental nature. The integrated self-conscious man, the lower self. So it may be said, this must be done, that must be done, the environment indicates this or that, but this integrated unit has its own tendency or direction. It wants to reinforce itself. Let's see. The integrated unit seeks its own reinforcement. And to this, the inner consciousness is sensitive. What it wants, its own direction, the direction of its desire in the world, the direction of its own insistence, which on a personality level we can call will, wishes, and desires. Sensitivity to personality, will, wishes, and desires, as if the personality will, wishes, and desires must be obeyed. Now eventually, through the will to rule, the inner man rules and dominates those personal promptings, the promptings of the king of beasts, the will, wishes, and desires of the lesser self. Rulership comes, but in the beginning, let other forms exist. I, the lower personality, rule. I rule them so that my will, wishes, and desires can be actuated in the environment. So, it's a big act of discrimination and choice going on here. To what am I sensitive? And how will I react to that, to what the sensitivity reveals? Now, here's the next phase of sensitivity. Sensitivity to the soul, the light of the soul, as the conditioning factor instead of sensitivity to the environmental world, and personality promptings as the conditioning factor. Soul. I now obey the soul and stand in the light of the soul. Okay, I stand in the light of the soul. And progressively, I tune out or become less sensitive to the lower impelling factors. I don't care what the personality is prompting me to do. I don't care what the environment is prompting me to do. I listen to the still small voice of the soul. And this is it's a fifth pedal process. It's attunement to and awareness of. And awareness of the higher self. Attunement to and awareness of the higher self. Sensitivity to the soul. Here is the Leo subject really listening to the promptings of what comes to be recognized as his higher identity. Finally, there is the spiritual sensitivity of the God-man. God-man. So that, let's say that, and I think this is important, the God-man is the Sphinx. Leo, Virgo combined. So the sensitivity of the soul-infused personality, the God-man, to the environment. This is for service purposes. The soul personality fused are sensitive to the environment, but also to what the spirit commands with respect to the environment. With respect to the environment, sensitive to what the Spirit commands with respect to the environment. At this stage of unfoldment, the liberated man he's liberated. The fixed cross has done its work. It is the cross of liberation. Light liberates. It is the cross of light. So let's say light liberates. At this stage of unfoldment, the liberated man is not conditioned by his environment, but begins the arduous task of conditioning it, being positive to it. In relation to the divine plan and purpose, and at the same time to cultivating sensitivity to the higher impacts of those worlds which lead to the final goal. So it's a stretch, both higher and lower. Positive to the environment, and negative to the still higher or divine worlds of spirit. And thereby one can become the true master, the high initiate, impressing by that which he has become the lower worlds, and being a true agent, a servant of a still higher king. So the lesser king subjects himself to the higher king. This is a position of self-effacement and humility. Self-effacement and humility. Yes. Well, I see the sun has come out. So I again have my fourth ray face, but under the circumstances, it's the best I can do. At least the side of the soul is illuminated. So, 4 types of sensitivity, environment, to the personality, to the soul, and finally to the wider environment and the higher impacts of the spirit, presumably leading to the final goal, which in terms of Leo and humanity is, I think, mastership. Masters of the 5-pointed star, masters are still human, Shohans are not. And it is to mastership that the energies of Leo lead, at least according to their numbers. They have just the right numbers for that. The 5th ray and the 5th initiation, and the 1st ray and the 5th initiation. It is a initiation ruled, we're told, particularly by the 5th ray at this time, but by the 1st ray at this time, but the 5th ray, of course, would be involved in terms of the luminosity achieved, because this initiation is, I think it's called the illumination. Oh, I hope I'm not forgetting that. I think it is. If we look at the rays and the initiations, page 340 or so, what will it be called? Revelation. Okay, close enough. The revelation of all that had been obscured in the lower worlds. The revelation which comes to the consciousness which is polarized within the higher parts of the spiritual triad. The revelation of not only the plan, but more of the purpose of God, the planetary logos. This is still an initiation officiated over by Sanat Kumara. After that, it is no longer Sanat Kumara per se. I want you to have this innate spiritual sensitivity and this outer material sensitivity most carefully in mind if you want truly to understand the influences of Leo upon human beings, and especially upon the person born in this sign or who has this sign rising, as well as its influences upon the planet. So I guess we're all, as human beings, influenced by a kind of innate sensitivity here. But it is a spiritual sensitivity and a material sensitivity at the same time. This, I think, is an important realization. And in the 4 types of sensitivity, he does, in type 1 and type 4, he does speak of the outer sensitivity. So especially to the Leo subject who is born in this sign or has the sign rising and therefore is born, what we say, under the sign. Throughout the universe, it is the soul which is the conscious, sensitive theme of the divine plan. So basically, it is the factor of consciousness which is the theme of the divine plan. The soul as the anima mundi, a special kind of consciousness working through the lower lives, or the soul of the world, animating all forms of life below the animal kingdom. Interesting here that the anima mundi, it seems, is not directly connected with the animal kingdom, but with, I would have thought it would have been all forms of life below the human kingdom. But no, it involves the plant kingdom, vegetable kingdom, and the mineral kingdom, and elemental kingdoms. The animal kingdom is perhaps too close in intelligence to the human. Anyway, the soul of the lower worlds, we can almost say. We can always say the consciousness characteristic of the lives of the lower worlds, lower than the animal kingdom. Animating, providing with soul, providing with consciousness, all forms of life below the animal kingdom. The soul as the animal soul, and the extension of this to the bodies of all animals, so it's the kind of consciousness that works through the animal kingdom, through the animal kingdom, and through all animal bodies, including the human physical body, which is directly related to the animal kingdom. No, is directly to the animal kingdom. The soul as the human soul, which is a still further expansion of the same sensitive factor. Consciousness is the sensitive factor. That we need to understand, that consciousness is a sensitive factor, and that sensitive factor continues to become more and more sensitive, more and more expanded, more and more capable of registering impact. The human soul, which is a still further expansion of the same sensitive factor. We're really talking about Leo and consciousness. We're calling it sensitivity, but augmented or stimulated by the principle of self-awareness. So consciousness, or of focused personal sensitivity to all subhuman human soul expression plus awareness, conscious or unconscious. In other words, there may be impacts of which one is not aware. One is registering, or they are making their impact, but one is not bringing them into the field of frontal awareness, plus awareness of the immortal or divine soul. So these are different kinds of soul, different kinds of expansions of the sensitive factor. Let's put it that way. Different kinds of expansions and deepenings of the sensitive factor. So far we have anima mundi, animal soul, human soul, and human soul, which has this range of awareness to the subhuman soul expression, and awareness also of the immortal or divine soul. Then we have another type of soul, the soul as ego or spiritual soul. On its own plane, it's a still higher form, a still higher form of sensitivity, a still higher form of sensitivity, the source of consciousness as far as the three worlds of evolution are concerned, and the goal of all present evolutionary process. So let's list these. This sensitive factor appears in various strata. Strata, which we call okay, cursor, there we are. We call this anima mundi. We call it animal soul, including the soul of the human physical body. Animal soul, including the bodies of all animals and the body of the human being. How did he put this? The individual soul? Is this what he called it? The human soul, simply that. Soul as human soul. Okay. Whoop. That's too high a jump. Human soul. And the ego, or soul on its own plane. Now there's many still more advanced forms of soul. I mean, one would want to speak of monadic soul, planetary soul, solar logoic soul, so forth, on and on and on. The sensitive factor is absolutely universal, and the one being and all emanatory beings from it have soul. So the sensitive factor is universal. And there is increasing sensitivity to self, which finally terminates in completely unobstructed sensitivity to the one and only self of cosmos, which we will know to be our one self. The game universe seems to be playing is to particularize and then universalize. What is small, what is big, those are meaningless things in a way, because compared to absolute infinitude, the biggest is an infinitesimal and the smallest is equally an infinitesimal. So there's no real absoluteness about big and small. There's only one form of comparison that's legitimate, and that's to the all. This all being the absolute infinitude, which negates the magnitude of any finite quantity or factor. So big and small is all within a relative range. Nothing absolute about size. No size stands before the obliterating infinitude of the absolute. Anyway, this sensitive factor keeps on expanding. We are experiencing at the moment that type of sensitivity, which is augmented by self-consciousness. How did DK put it? Augmented or stimulated by the principle of self-awareness, or a focused personal sensitivity to all subhuman soul expressions, plus awareness of the divine soul. So really, look at the triple nature of a human soul. Let's call it we'll come down here and we'll call this augmented by self-consciousness, having awareness as well of subhuman soul and superhuman soul, thus a triple form of soul, or a triple sensitivity. The term soul is so difficult because sometimes we use it to mean the ego factor on the higher mental plane as an entity, but really it's an expanding sensitivity of encapsulated being. And encapsulated being has as a natural extension of itself sensitivity, and this sensitivity grows from the tiniest scope of awareness to the most universal scope eventually. So it's the growth of the sensitive factor which is our discussion. So we are involved in discussing the growth of the sensitive factor, or soul, or consciousness. This is our theme, and this is the focal Leo theme, the expansion of and deepening of consciousness, and with it the perception of a changed identity. Yes. The Leo factor, sensitivity, knowing what is the temporary self and the temporary not self, and this temporary self ever makes incursions upon the temporary not self until more of the temporary not self is included within the self, until the entire not self is included in self. And this is occult identification. This is the realization of the high mystic, but especially the identificatory realization of the occultist. At first there is self and not self, but eventually there's only self. The three aspects of the sun, as dealt with in the secret doctrine, are of importance at this point, because influences flowing through or from them bring the entire subjective and latent world consciously to the fore and produce eventually, at the final revelation and liberation, the full expression of the consciousness of deity. So, these different aspects of the sun bring in a sensitivity to the subjective, entire subjective and latent world, consciousness. They bring the heart of the sun, bringing in the world of soul, or the higher mental plane, maybe aspects of the spiritual triad, the central spiritual sun, bringing in a still more inclusive world, the world of the monad, and potentially far beyond that, as the monad will take a great outward bound excursion on the way of higher evolution. So through the three aspects of the sun, as they are embodied in man, also, they are embodied in man, sensitivity to very subtle realms is also revealed. And the inner worlds, inner worlds are revealed. And this will produce eventually at the final revelation and liberation. Now, when he says final revelation, you know, what is this? But in a smaller sense, mastership, the full expression of the consciousness of deity. Well, let's stay within our macrocosm, the full expression of the consciousness of the solar logos. Let's call it that. And this can be called divine sensitivity, the universal mind, with the universe being our local solar system, as considered by this word universe, or denoted by this word universe, or the divine plan or purpose. Words, right. Words are inadequate to express that of which the highest initiate as yet knows but little, and maybe he means within our hierarchy, or does he mean on other planets as well? But maybe he means the highest initiate as humanity can conceive of the initiatory process. So there are increasing forms of soul. This sensitive factor expands until it is the macrocosmic sensitive factor, the divine sensitivity of the solar logos and of the universal mind, which is the, let's call it the soul awareness of the solar logos. This term universe, you know, can mean the whole thing, of course, the entirety of the cosmos, vast beyond human comprehension, or it can simply mean our particular little system. So when we are developing the sense of universality and participating in universal mind, we certainly cannot think of going beyond the consciousness, the soul consciousness of our solar logos. What the solar logos knows, and that to which the solar logos is sensitive when focused in its own soul nature, which is not yet complete, we understand. So this sense of what the self is, which is the Leo theme, arrived at through an ever-expanding sensitivity to self and sensitivity to that which is not self, continues to grow. The ring past knot ever widens in a Jupiterian-like fashion, since those two are so related, Jupiter and the Sun, ever expanding and including in a second-ray manner more and more, until the consciousness of the unit is planetarized, as Dane Rudyard might say, and eventually solarized, becoming universal in the sense of being able to reach to the confines of our solar system. These are great destinies possessed by the monad, rejected entirely by the presently limited mind and conception of man. Too big a picture is threatening to the world conception which the tiny little ego has prepared for itself to make it feel comfortable, safe, and secure. So even of this universal mind, this universal soul awareness, the awareness of our soto-logoic Christ nature, the second aspect of our soto-logos, all of this, even the highest initiate in our hierarchy, would we say even initiates of the 8th and 9th degree, as yet know but little. These three aspects of the sun are the factors which bring consciousness to the birth, different kinds of consciousness, and make the ultimate goal attainable. Three aspects of the sun, or of the, let's call it soto-logos, sun, and sun, make the different levels of consciousness attainable. They make all forms of consciousness possible because they are rooted in the sun. And the soto-logos has all forms of consciousness within his universe. Soto-logos has all forms of consciousness within his local universe, the solar system, and his vehicles above his solar system. Well, in a way, we can't say he has all. He, this great being, like ourselves, is growing into his own soul nature, his own spirit nature, but potentially he has all forms of consciousness. When he truly knows himself, it will be analogous to that tiny event which occurs when we truly know ourself. Our subconscious self, our normally conscious self, and our superconscious self, and thus it will be for him. Our soto-logos is not yet sufficiently superconscious to say that all forms of self-knowledge are his, but they will be. So the soto-logos is the potential for all forms of consciousness within this solar system. So rooted in the sun, I think, really means rooted in the solar logos. And let's just say this. As our solar logos becomes more conscious of himself, so we, tiny units of his life, become more conscious of our self on three levels. Just as he has three levels of which to become conscious. So these are rooted in the sun, symbolically speaking, yes, only symbolically speaking, and are an inherent aspect of the greater whole. So let's just say that the, how can we put it, the sensitive factor is ever growing, microcosmically and macrocosmically. And this is the work of, at least in our little system, of the influence of Leo, which is ever ruling the growth of the sensitive factor. Let's just say it. Leo rules the growth of the, well, sensitive factor, which is consciousness itself, and thus Leo is mostly related to the second aspect of divinity. We need to have this sense of hierarchical relations, which are primary, secondary, tertiary relations. So here, at least symbolically, or maybe to a degree literally, we see the relationship of the aspects of the sun to different levels of consciousness. The physical sun is related to the anima mundi, which is soul, or the sensitive factor below the animal kingdom, but also to the animal soul, and like the third ray, it is related to multiplicity. The heart of the sun, which is the soul nature of our solar logos, is related to the human soul and to the divine ego, and brings in the duality of the second ray, which is the soul and body consciousness, related to Gemini in a way. Gemini, heart of the sun. The central spiritual sun is divine consciousness, and or is the sponsor of divine consciousness. The monadic nature of the solar logos is related to divine consciousness, and it is the sponsor of the will of the whole, of the solar logoic whole, and its awareness of God, the solar logos, and unity, awareness of God, the solar logos. In occultism, we don't always speak of the entirely cosmic whole. We do confine our attention to a sphere of influence about which we may actually know something and in which we can participate to a degree. This is really all about the solar logos. We're talking about the personality nature of the solar logos, the soul nature of the solar logos, and the spirit or divine or monadic nature of the solar logos. And we use the symbol sun, even though we mean the solar logos. The sun itself is simply an instrument. The solar logos is the real being. So we move from 3 to 2 to 1, from multiplicity to duality to unity. So here, this is under the third aspect, duality, obviously under the second, and unity or synthesis under the first aspect. These are the different aspects of the sun. Now, response to these different aspects of the nature of the solar logos evoke from us corresponding states of consciousness or sensitivity. So attention to Leo and the solar logos expand our consciousness or sensitive factor. And that's what we're interested in doing in this second solar system. Well, we've reached here the end of Esoteric Astrology Adventure 90, Section C, on page 296. And we will begin with Esoteric Astrology Adventure 90, Section D, page 296. This is an occult book. DK called it his most occult book because it deals specifically, maybe exclusively, with energy. Even more occult than a treatise on cosmic fire. Though in a way more, well, it is a macrocosmic book, but it also touches on the spiritual psychology of the microcosm, which the treatise on cosmic fire tends to do much less. It's more of a seed book, which was then expanded into a number of different treatises which had applicability to the members of the Fourth Kingdom. So we have to ask ourselves what our level of identity is responding to which aspect of the solar logos. His personal nature, his soul nature, or his divine monadic nature. All right. This takes us exactly to 3 hours, and so both goodbye and hello. Goodbye and hello.